In March 2018, the cover of the Malayalam magazine Grihalakshmi featured a model breastfeeding a baby, and it had the headline, "Mothers tell Kerala, please don't stare, we need to breastfeed." Now, this image evoked a range of responses. It, it got a lot of applause for a campaign to normalize breastfeeding in public, but it got some flack for supposed titillation and for the choice of a model instead of an actual breastfeeding mother. But the public discourse and the social media debate over this cover image bypassed some far more important conversations that we should have been having. The one about how the majority of women do not get support from the state or from society when it comes to maternity and childcare. The one about how women are often penalized at their jobs when they have children. And the one about how women's bodies are often seen as liabilities. Now, researchers and activists and journalists have been writing about these things for years and years, but somehow it has remained in a big blind spot when it comes to public consciousness. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised when, even now in 2019, in fact, just about a month ago, a woman friend of mine told me that her male boss, who runs a small dental practice, did not want to hire women. And no prizes for guessing why. He said women take leave when they menstruate and women quit their jobs when they get pregnant. So why do women quit their jobs? Let's stick with breastfeeding for a minute. Breastfeeding in public has never really been taboo in India. It's wonderfully common to see women across villages in India breastfeeding while doing their chores outdoors, or while on a suburban train in Mumbai, or a local bus in Chennai. But somehow, these freedoms disappear in a big mall or a swanky office. I was working on a story on breastfeeding, and I was speaking to office-going new mothers about how they managed. They didn't manage. They struggled. One woman told me that it was an ordeal for her to get back to work 4 months after she had her baby. When she did get back to work, she found that there was no place to pump milk or to store it. The office administration offered her a sick room or a meeting room if these spaces were not being used otherwise. I spoke to several women who had similar stories and some who had quit their jobs because they just couldn't manage. In fact, an industry estimate from around the time says that 37% of women opt out of their jobs mid-career because of maternity and childcare commitments. Now, India has made some progress since I had these conversations with these women. In 2017, the government passed the Maternity Benefits Act that entitles a woman to 26 weeks or 6.5 months of full paid maternity leave. Now, this was a long overdue move and a very welcome one that will actually help women breastfeed their children for 6 months as mandated by the World Health Organization without having to leave their jobs. But there's still a catch. Some employers see the law as a reason not to hire women or to pay them less because possibly they will have to give them full paid maternity leave somewhere in the future. Women also, when they come back from maternity leave, find themselves find that they have missed out on opportunities for advancement. They have missed out on promotions and pay hikes. Clearly, men don't pay the same price for having families. All this being said, only about 5% of India's women work in the organized sector. The majority, 95%, work in the unorganized sector or do unpaid work like housework. The women in the unorganized sector are not even eligible for maternity benefits under the 2017 Act because they're not recognized as being formally employed. There are government schemes that give cash assistance to pregnant women so that they can afford to eat well and as compensation for wage loss when they have children. But these schemes are inadequate and they're poorly implemented and largely remain unfulfilled promises. Some women in the unorganized sector face far more dire consequences for simply the way the female body functions. In April this year, one journalist found that in Maharashtra's Bid district, women were being forced to have hysterectomies. These are surgeries to remove the uterus. Why was this happening? These women worked as sugarcane cutters on a contract basis. And the contractors did not want to hire women who took leave during their periods or would go on leave for maternity. So these women were either being forced or felt compelled to have major surgery that could have severe lifelong effects on their health. Now, unwarranted hysterectomies have been reported from Bihar, from Andhra Pradesh, from Karnataka. Unethical doctors have actually performed these surgeries on women who didn't need them simply to claim reimbursements from government health insurance schemes. There are far more common forms of exploitation when it comes to women's health, like the high rate of C-sections or cesarean sections, where hospitals profit from scheduling a large number of these procedures and billing for them, instead of waiting hours or maybe days to assist in the slightly more unschedulable natural birth. There's a lot of apathy when it comes to women's health. A few years ago, I was working with a team of reporters on a series on pain, and we decided to look into a condition called dysmenorrhea. Now, you might not have heard this term, but it refers to menstrual cramps and the often debilitating pain that accompanies it. As the story pointed out, there is very little interest in the medical community when it comes to dysmenorrhea, and there's very little funding for it. One of the few studies into it said that up to 30% of women suffer severe debilitating pain when they have this condition. And yet most women are left to rely on hot water bottles or a painkiller or two for relief. What's worse, many women are told by their gynecologists that the cure for their pain is to have a baby, completely ignoring the other factors in a woman's life and the choices that she might want to make. Now, you might have noticed that I've only been talking about reproductive health so far, and that is the second big blind spot. It's a huge blind spot. Conversations around women's health are almost always restricted to reproductive health and ignore most aspects of general health. A few years ago, there was a report released by the George Institute, and it was on the state of women's health in India in the 21st century. And here's what it says. Despite greater life expectancy, women have a higher burden of disability due to non-communicable diseases. This means that even if they live longer, women suffer more from conditions like back and neck pain, from respiratory disorders, and from depression. Now, it's very hard to shine a light on the state of women's general health in India because there's very little gender-specific data. That is, we know very little about how disease affects men and women differently. There are studies in other parts of the world, for example, that women with diabetes have a higher risk of heart attack and stroke than men with diabetes. In India, from the little data that we have, we know that 7 of the top 10 causes of death among women are from non-communicable diseases like heart attack and stroke. And still, there is a widespread perception that heart attack and stroke are diseases that mainly affect men. That if a woman was to get a heart disease, it wouldn't be as serious as it is in a man. Let me give you another example of this blind spot. In India, we talk a lot about maternal mortality and the slow progress that we are making in reducing maternal deaths. But did you know that tuberculosis is one of the biggest killers of women in India, and something like 18 women die every hour of TB? When I was working on the series on pain, I suddenly found myself talking to a number of women who had a condition called fibromyalgia. I had never heard the term before, and I discovered that fibromyalgia is an intense chronic muscular pain that can completely take away a person's ability to function normally. Now, fibromyalgia is a difficult disorder to understand. Patients find it difficult to describe the symptoms. One woman told me that she experienced it as a severe pain in her pelvic region, and she used to have headaches so bad that she felt the need to clench something between her jaws. Another woman told me that her pain was so intense that she found it difficult to lift her young child. So patients find it hard to describe, doctors find it hard to diagnose, and medical researchers are still trying to find out whether it has a genetic or an environmental cause. What we do know about fibromyalgia is that it affects about 2% of the adult population, and that far more women report symptoms than men. So I can't help but wonder, would we know more about this condition? Would there be more research if as many men were affected as women are? So why do we need to think and talk differently about women's health? Why do we need to turn a spotlight on these blind spots? Well, there is the economic argument. India has among the lowest female labor force participation in South Asia at just about 24%. In the decade leading up to 2011, which is the last year of the census, about 20 million women fell off the labor map. We cannot fulfill the promises of being a trillion-dollar economy and a global economic powerhouse if women aren't able to work because they're unwell, or they're too busy looking after their own health or the health of their families all on their own. So what can we do about this? Well, here is a very basic wish list. We need the government to provide adequate and sustainable maternity assistance and maternity benefits to all women. We need companies to implement these state-mandated maternity benefits and to rethink their HR policies so that women do not take several steps back in their careers when they have children. And while we're at it, why not level the playing field and have a paternity leave so new fathers can stay home and take care of the kids while new mothers get back to work? We need a health system that can look into whether women are affected more seriously than men when it comes to certain diseases and respond appropriately. If it is too difficult to have gender-specific general health data, then we need the health system to respond to everyone, to all genders equally. Finally, this is about basic rights. We have long argued that we must ensure the safety of women, not just because they are mothers or daughters or sisters or wives, but as individuals and because they're equal citizens of a society. Let's take that argument further. Let's say that we must ensure the health of women, not because they are members of a workforce or that they're going to raise future members of society, but as individuals and equal citizens as well. Thank you.